Hey viewers, my name's Cara. I'm your host for Tuesdays here on the Pagan Perspective. I'm hoping to get this done in one take and just direct upload it so I don't have to spend even more time today editing and recording, because I've spent a lot of time today thinking about this topic and talking it over with my partner and talking with some other people through messages online, just preparing to talk. And this week we are talking about sexual assault allegations in the world in general, and how this kind of topic affects the pagan community, how we should respond to it if we think that we should have anything to say about it as a community at all, things like that. So this topic comes from Jenny, and the topic description, as well as the link to the article that they shared with us within the topic, will be in the description of my video here below. And I'm just going to go through some of the major bullet points. So Jenny's question is about, with all the sexual assault allegations coming to light recently, especially in Hollywood, but also in other aspects around the world, how do we think that issues like this affect the pagan community? Is this something that as a community we think we should engage with or address in any way? If so, how do we go about doing that? How do we go about addressing it and engaging with this topic, this issue? And do we think that our community is affected differently at all by topics such as this compared to other communities, for example? And the article that Jenny shared is one that had been getting passed around in pagan Facebook groups that they are a part of, and people were discussing and coming up with suggestions, so they shared this article with us. And it is an article that I actually read at the end of last year when it came out, which was in early November, roundabout, and I actually found it through Twitter because I believe the article was reprinted by Pathos Pagan, perhaps. It was shared there and shared via their Twitter, which is how I first read it. And it is entitled, "Paganism Has a Creepy Guy Problem," which is a very get to the point, you understand what this topic is about just by reading that. So I had read the article before and I reread it to talk about this again, and I just want to go over some bullet points of that as well. So the link is in the description. Please go read it if you want to read the article in full. So I want to say that I love that the article addresses right up front that we, as a community of paganism, I'm looking down at my notes, that we are a community that is about alternative culture, that we are about creating new ways of relating with ourselves and with each other and with the world and with the environment and with all different kinds of things, that we are about forming new relationships and creating better structures, that we are about challenging the dominant structure, is a phrase that was used in the article a lot. And I love that it says that right up front. It says, our views as pagans are revolutionary. And a word that I really personally have come to identify more with lately is radical. That our views are radical. And this has come up a lot for me personally with views that people who watch my channel have, and as I'm learning more about those kinds of things, the kinds of things that they think are or are not related to my channel, are or are not related to the pagan community and the witchcraft community. And I actually drafted a blog about this week that I haven't posted yet, but I started talking about things like this, and so I love that this article says it right up front. The pagan community, we are revolutionary. We are about different ways of thinking and different ways of relating to each other that are different than the dominant social structure of which we are currently a part. And so I'm just really thankful that the article puts that right up front, because I totally agree. And I will say that as a woman, as a female, and someone who identifies as feminine, as a woman, and who, even when I don't identify specifically with the binary, because I do fully believe in spectrums and all of that, but I do identify as female, I identify as a woman as well. But even when I don't, recognizing that people view me as a female, regardless. People view me as feminine, they see me as a woman, all these things. I have experienced a whole lot of things that this article talks about. And so, for my personal experience, and for the personal experience of pretty much all of my female identifying friends and my friends who are perceived as female by other people who have shared these kinds of things with me, the women I have been in circle with in groups where we've talked about things like sexual assault, where we've talked about just general issues of the way that people in society relate to women, I can say that the things talked about in this article are capital T true for me. And while, my partner and I were talking about the different ways that we can go about having these conversations, and where we can say some things in a very aggressive and upfront manner, such as making the title of your blog Paganism Has a Creepy Guy Problem, versus being a little bit gentler with topics. There are different ways that we can approach this conversation, but I personally resonate with everything in this article, and so anyone who may be tempted to read that and doubt that these things happen, doubt that those feelings are shared by lots of women because maybe it hasn't happened to you, maybe you haven't experienced it personally, which I personally think is something to give thanks for. So I hope that you sit in gratitude for a moment if that is your experience. If you have not experienced these things, these fears, these violations, that you sit in gratitude for that, and that you also take a moment to sit in love for the people who have, or maybe not love, maybe compassion, whatever, to maybe send some energy to the people who have experienced these things, because it is true that they happen, and that a lot of us, if not all of us, relate to these things. They've happened our whole lives. And so I don't need to get into the details of what specifically ever has happened to me, but things have happened, instances have occurred at pagan pride events, at medieval fairs, with people that I just met, with people who I've known for a few years and thought I knew pretty well, with, people who don't even introduce themselves. People walk up to you and make assumptions and say things or do things without even ever trying to know you, because they make false assumptions about what our community is and who we are and what's appropriate, which, getting back to my bullet points about the article now, the article talks about. So I love that it says our views are revolutionary right up there. The next thing I wrote down is that people mistake having open-minded views about things for anything goes, right? They mistake it for a free pass, we'll say. And that is something that I have experienced happen in the pagan community, outside of the pagan community, and in other communities of which I am a part. So one example that I do love to share, that I think is really demonstrative, is within the theater community. There are a lot of stereotypes of pagans that are also stereotypes of theater people, that we are very sexually open and sexually progressive, and that we're very okay with intimacy and touching and things like that. And I think that is a stereotype of an ideal of the pagan community, because we are known as being very sex positive and very accepting. We view sex as sacred. We view sexual identity and gender roles and all kinds of things as being fluid and being on a spectrum, and all types of people and sexualities and gender identities and expressions and relationship identities and, romantic identities. All of these things are accepted and loved, pretty much, as the article says, pretty much as long as it's safe, sane, and consensual and among adults. Pagans are pretty much okay with it. And so that is a really positive thing that we want to foster, is this positive environment around sex, and sex is sacred, and it's not dirty and something that needs to be shunned and you're going to hell for, and blah, blah, blah. So we have these different views from a lot of other people. And there are similar stereotypes about theater. And where I think it comes from in theater personally, as an actor and someone who's worked in various aspects of theater, is that you develop very close relationships with people with whom you work with whom you work in theater for long periods of time, because we do trust exercises and we work together in a small group, and we have to, you're dealing with very strong emotions that you're portraying as an actor a lot of the time if you're doing a very emotional play or whatever. And so you work through human emotions together with these people because you're about to portray human emotions on stage. And it's not necessarily you, but you're trying to find what part of you is in that character and how do you bring these characters to life. And so, yeah, there might be a sex scene in a play, or there might be a kissing scene in a play, but it might also just be completely non-erotic, non-sexual, just vulnerability, just pure vulnerability and openness. And that is such a raw emotion in general. And so, like, my director used to always talk to us about being naked on stage. It's one thing to be on stage without clothes. You can be very confident in yourself and be completely shielded from any kind of emotion, any kind of anything that could be thrown at you while unclothed on stage. But to be truly emotionally raw and open and vulnerable as a human being on stage in front of the eyes of so many people or in our daily lives, that is what our director taught us it truly means to be naked. And you can be naked in that regard, fully clothed. So actors and theater people, we work together on these intense emotional connections and intimacy and openness and what makes human beings feel the way that they do, and how can we bring that to life in a way that is true to these characters. And so, to me, that is where the intimacy and the comfort comes from, that when you work with people that closely, you are comfortable being physically close to them. And, again, with the stage kisses or the stage sex scenes or whatever, but you develop very close friendships and things like this. So there was an individual in our theater department when I was in college who entered as a brand new student, had never met us before, and pretty much from day one began touching people inappropriately without their consent. And when we confronted this person and said, "That is not okay, what are you doing?" it turned out that this person was under the false assumption that that's what theater people do. And they thought they could just waltz into this community and, not knowing any of us yet, walking in day one, brand new stranger, and they assumed that they had the right to be as physically close and intimate with all of us that we all had developed over, months and years, whatever it is, weeks, months, years of working together and developing trust, doing those trust exercises and having all these things. It's something that develops over time. And this person had a complete misconception of that. They had this conception that that's just what happens and it's all good, it's all okay, anything goes. And so I think people have that same misconception about a community like paganism that is sex positive. They think, oh, this is how it is. You just walk in and this is, this is how you can be, and you can just touch people and you can just expect people to want to have sex with you immediately. And that's not how it works. These are things that, within a working group, you develop that intimacy, you develop that rapport with people through working with them and becoming close to them. So, yeah, just the article addresses that topic, and that's one of my personal examples for how I think those stereotypes they're true things about the communities, but they're things that develop over time. They're not things that you can just walk into and take advantage of. The article talks about truly bad guys who are coming into situations with the intent of doing things they know are inappropriate and that they know are, unacceptable, that they know are making people uncomfortable. And then there are people, for example, if they've already been confronted and they've been told that it's not okay and they keep doing it, then they're not doing it unaware. They're doing it on purpose, and we need to call those people out and make it clear that that's not acceptable in our community. And I agree with that. I think that needs to happen. And I've tried to do that before, like I said, with the people in our theater community. We were like, that's not okay. What are you doing? Why are you doing this? Because it ruins it for everyone. It means that no one feels comfortable anymore, and you can't have those real connections and make that magic happen on stage or in your ritual circle. You can't make that magic happen anymore if someone is ruining it, if someone is corrupting the energy. And yeah, these are things that are important to me, and that I have experienced a lot. So I think that they need to be called out. I think it needs to be made clear when things are not okay. And then it makes a distinction between those people who are doing things on purpose and people who, once they actually realize that what they're doing is inappropriate, would be horrified to know. Like, they're not intending to do it. They just really don't think of it as being wrong. And I think there are so many more people in the world who think that way about so many things. I know so many people who continually say racist things and truly believe that they're not racist, that those things and those ideas are perfectly okay, and those are normal things, because everyone thinks that. That's not racism. Everybody thinks, And in the same vein, I hear people who say outright sexist things all the time, who truly believe that they're not sexist. They're not trying to do it. They don't think they're doing anything wrong, but it is wrong. And no matter how much people tell them that, they refuse. And so there are always going to be people who just don't see it. But, so we realize the fact that there are people within our community, within all communities, who, when they finally realize that what they're doing is inappropriate, when they finally believe it, will be horrified at their past actions. And, there are even things that in my life that I look back on now and I'm like, oh my God, I used to do that. I used to say those kinds of things. I used to think those kinds of things. I used to assume things about people and their comfort level. And now I'm like, whoa, that's really, we learn from that, and I forgive myself for being in that place in the past, and I've made the apologies that I need to make, and I've corrected the things that I need to correct. But yeah, once you see it, you could be horrified at things that you've done, and recognizing that it's not what you meant at all. It's really. So the article ends with an ask for people to give suggestions, and they give a few suggestions of their own. So some of the suggestions that they had were things like, we need to get rid of language and thought patterns of rejection. We need to get rid of this idea that if someone doesn't want to have sex with you, or if someone doesn't want to have a romantic relationship with you, that it means they're rejecting you as a person, and that it means that you are less, that there's something wrong with you. So we need to get rid of this idea that our self-worth, that our core worth is tied to our, ability to attract a mate in whatever way. And so there's a lot of work here that pagans do on their own, that witches do on their own. I can't necessarily speak for everyone, because I know not everyone does the same work, but a lot of the people that I interact with, a lot of the work that I do, a lot of the work that the groups I work with do, is around these kinds of things, is about core worth and self-worth and self-love, and realizing these patterns that the overall society has taught us, that we have been raised with, thinking that if someone doesn't want you in a certain way, that it means something's wrong with you, that you are undesirable, right? You're unwanted, so therefore you're not good. And just dealing with all of these things that we've been taught to think and feel, and realizing where we have those feelings and how we can remove those blockages and create something better, replace it with positive things. Again, we're challenging the dominant structures. We are creating new ways of relating to one another. And as a side note to that, the article talks about the idea of developing intimacy without implications of eroticism. And I love that because, again, my college friends, my theater friends, we are very intimate with one another as far as like emotion and, working together and developing that trust and intimacy that's not sexual and not erotic in any way. That we can be physically close to one another, we can hold hands, we can snuggle on the couch, and it has never been sexual, it has never been erotic, it has never even been romantic for some of us. And those kinds of relationships are appropriate between us because we've developed that rapport and we have an understanding. But then when you go out of that community, whether it's your coven or your grove or whatever your group is that you have that kind of rapport with, or whether it's your castmates, when you go outside of whatever community that is and there's just another person, and you might want to be physically close to someone who's a friend, but they have the notion that you only do that if you want to have sex, for example. So that creates a disconnect, that you can't be physically close to that person if you're not willing to do what they think that means. So these are things that that we can engage in intentional community, but not necessarily in the general public society, because society doesn't have those same rules about things. And so the next point was developing appropriate contexts of when it's appropriate to hit on people and when it isn't. Can you hit on someone at Pagan Pride or not? Is that appropriate or not? Should you hit on someone right before the invocation during a ritual while you're in circle? Probably not an appropriate time. Do you save the hitting on people for after the ritual? Developing those contexts. Like, when is that okay? Is it okay at the once a month pagan local mixer coffee night? That might be an okay place to ask someone on a date. Probably not in the middle of invoking deity in circle. Just things like that, coming up with contexts. And creating spaces where it's safe to express a desire to become sexually intimate with someone or to ask someone out, and making sure that it's okay also to safely say no in those environments. And that's what a safe space means. And, I go back to this idea, there's a saying, it's something like, if you can't say no, then you can't say yes. And what it means is, if you're saying no isn't a real, valid response that will be accepted in the situation, then you can't really say yes. Because if there's no option to say no, saying yes means less. So when you actually decide to say yes enthusiastically to an opportunity, it means more. Because you could also say no and have that be acceptable. And the issue is when someone says yes because they're coerced, because there is no viable option for them to actually say no. So if there is a physical threat, if there is a verbal threat, things like that might make people think it is not safe for me to say no, because there will be consequences that I cannot deal with. It is not acceptable for me to say no, so I have to say yes to remain safe. That is not a real yes. That is coercion, not consent. And so then the author of the article asks, what do we think a good exchange would look like? So, for example, asking women, because the article is focused on straight men hitting on women, so men who are attracted to women. And it makes that very clear that that is the only, and within the pagan community, that is the specific instance being talked about in the article. Other situations exist. Obviously, women do inappropriate things as well toward women, toward men. Men may do it to other men. Women do it to women, etc. But this article was specifically talking about pagan men who are attracted to women. So what would a good exchange look like? So for me, the example I go to is when I went to my first witch camp, which is within the reclaiming tradition of witchcraft, which is something, it makes it very clear that we are all about healthy boundaries and obtaining consent for everything including, day one, you walk in and people are going to ask you if it's okay to hug you, if you are open to receiving hugs at this time. And if you are not open to receiving a hug, you can say, no, I'm not, no, thank you. And people will say, okay. And you can offer an alternative. You can say, but I could shake your hand, whatever. Or you can say, no, I'd rather not receive hugs right now, but I'll accept positive energy, whatever it may be. We have those agreements. And so, yeah, right from the get-go, people will say, are you open to receiving a hug? Or do you hug? Are you a hugger? May I hug you? Anything like that. We are used to asking the question. And so I love that about it. And, anything like that, we will ask for consent before consoling someone who's crying, because maybe they don't need comforted, maybe they're just going through a spiritual breakthrough and they need to have that emotional release, and you don't need to stifle it, because crying and showing emotion is not something that you have to hush up. You don't have to make someone feel like, oh, you shouldn't be having this reaction right now, it's a bad reaction. No. Emotional release is a good thing, it's a healthy thing. I talked about this in one of our other recent videos about releasing anger is a healthy thing. Releasing emotion is healthy. So we ask for consent before we help someone get over an emotion, because we allow them to have their emotions. And so we ask people what they need, what is okay. So I love that. So that's a good suggestion for me, is I love that that has been the case with reclaiming workshops and things that I've attended. So my example is from my first witch camp. There was a fellow witch who heard me talk about dealing and working with ideas and my own personal concepts of love and sexuality and relationships and romantic relationships and sexual relationships, and what these things mean and what relationships can look like and how love expresses itself in my life and all these things. And so this person wanted to talk with me more about it, and they asked me, would you be open to exploring some energy work around sexual energy with me? And I said, well, what would that look like to you? And they said, well, I would like to do energy work, and I would like to hold your hand. I would like to hold hands and do energy work. Would that be something that's okay with you? And I said, well, I'll have to think about it. And they said, okay. They gave me 3 days before they checked in again. So there was absolutely no pressure. They were not asking me over and over and over, day after day. They gave it a good 3 days to come back and say, have you given it any more thought? Would you be open to doing some energy work and holding hands? And I said, I really don't think I'm ready for that right now. And they said, okay. Beautiful. I never felt pressured. I never felt like I couldn't say no. I said no, and they were okay with it, and they gave me respectful time in between. There was also an instance where someone asked me, would it be okay if I put my arm around you? Because we were walking together and it was cold. And they said, would it be okay if I put my arm around you? And I said, yes. And it means a lot when you can say yes, knowing that you could have also said no. I've had people ask, may I kiss you? And I've enthusiastically said yes, which is a great feeling, because I've also had people force a kiss on me that I did not consent to, and I just love to be a part of knowing that a moment is about to happen. And I know some people think, oh, it's less fun when you know it's going to happen. That's not the case for me. It takes away a lot of my power when someone forces an event on me, something as intimate as a kiss, without my consent. I love when people ask me, may I kiss you? Because it means I get to be a part of that moment with them. And that's really powerful and meaningful to me. And I've also had people ask, may I kiss you? Where I've said, no. And they said, okay. And that's it, and they never push. And those have all been within contexts of groups like Reclaiming, where consent and healthy boundaries are an understood thing that we're all working on. And I've brought that into my personal life. So a lot of the time I get more into the habit of, when I meet new people, asking them, are you a hugger? May I give you a hug? Rather than just going in for a hug. Because I also have friends who really do not like being physically touched. And I have seen them be hugged by other people who are aggressive huggers, and the people who don't love it are like, they freeze. They're not enjoying this at all. Like, you just violated their personal space. And all it takes is saying, are you a hugger? And if they say no, you have to be okay with that. Because if you're not okay with that, then that's gets into the coercion thing. It's not okay. You have to be okay with it. Even though if you're a hugger and you love to hug people, you have to be okay with other people not wanting you to hug them. Okay? And that's a big thing. Because we're huggers, right? And so a lot of people think, that's ridiculous. I shouldn't have to ask someone's permission to hug them. You shouldn't have to ask someone's permission to touch them, to come into their physical space and touch their physical person. You don't think you need their permission to do that? Think about it. Just think about it. And I also think that if we think it's ridiculous to ask someone to hug them, if we think that's weird, that ruins the moment, that's so weird and uncomfortable. If you would be uncomfortable asking someone if you can hug them, then I don't think you can have a conversation about whether or not a person really wants to have sex with you. And I know that's not a concern for everyone, because not everyone out there in the world is sexually attracted to people at all. So there's a lot of different sexual orientations and identities. So we have asexual and demisexual and all different kinds of things. So I know not everyone is looking for sex at all, right? And so that's a consideration too. We have to be aware of that. That not everyone in the world wants to have sex, period. Not just with you. They just don't like it in general, So it's a thing. There's all things to consider. It doesn't necessarily mean you're a horrible person. People just have their own preferences. You're allowed to have preferences about things. So, yeah, and people say like, oh, well, it ruins the moment if you ask someone if you can kiss them. No, it doesn't. I've had multiple partners ask if they can kiss me. And like I said, I appreciate it because I love being a part of that. I want to be enthusiastic about being a part of that rather than have someone do something to me and then afterwards be like, yeah, I wish that didn't happen. I didn't want that to happen. I wish you had asked me because I would have told you no. And then we could avoid this, where I now feel violated because you did something to my body without my consent. This is my realm. This is where I live. You get to come in here if I allow you here. Forcing your way in here is violation. And that has happened to me in multiple ways, multiple times. And so it's important, I think, to establish a system in which we obtain consent and we are not ashamed or feel weird about asking if you can hug someone, asking if they'll let you kiss them. And I'm not saying if you're in a relationship with someone, you don't have to ask them every individual time if that's what you've worked out. You don't have to, like my partner and I now have an assumption that we have physical cues that we use, but we also, so now we kind of operate in terms of like, okay, having permission to kiss one another is the norm because that's our relationship, that's our agreement. But then if we don't want it to happen for whatever reason, we verbally say so, and we're okay with that. And so we say, I'd rather you not kiss me right now. Or, like maybe it's whatever, I'd rather such and such thing that we have agreed in our relationship is a normal ongoing occurrence. We have like ongoing consent. People talk about that sometimes. So you can arrange that within your own relationship. But we do also have verbal check-ins where we will say if something's not okay. And that's not something that I had to lay down as a rule, by the way. That's something that my partner just understands because they've been raised by parents who had these ideals of consent and teaching, how we respect other people's bodily autonomy. And things like, I also personally, if a friend's child, if I'm meeting a child, any child, and I ask them for a hug and they say no, I say, that's okay. And if their parent tries to convince them to hug me, I say, no. They said no, your child does not have to hug me. I respect what that human being, tiny as they may be, that decision that they made about their body. They don't want to hug me, they don't have to hug me. It's cool. I'm cool with it. Doesn't mean they don't like me. It means they don't want to hug me. That's it. I don't want to hug everybody all the time, and I wish people asked me more than just doing it. Gosh darn it, So I get that some people think it's ridiculous, and yet I don't think it's ridiculous. I think it's a beautiful thing and a wonderful thing to allow people to be in control of themselves and to respect each other's decisions about ourselves. I think that's normal. I think that should be more normal than it is. So I encourage everyone to just think about these things and realize it's really not that crazy. It's really not. It's decent. It's kind. And yeah, we are a revolutionary group of people, right? And so one of the points that I made in my blog post, which will probably be going up later this month because I'll get back to it and I'll publish it, but I got all my thoughts out, before. One of the points that I made was a lot of us in this community were not born into it, right? Some of us were raised pagan, which is awesome, but a lot of us were not. So a lot of us were born into something else within the dominant structure in our society, the dominant power in our society, and we found something else. We found something outside that. This is a minority religion still. There are a lot of us. There are a lot more of us than people think, and we are everywhere, but we are still a minority religion. We are still a fringe group. So we found this. We found this outside the norm. We found this outside the dominant structure. And so all of us who came from something else and made a conscious decision to be part of this community, to be part of these paths, you have already made an immensely powerful change in your life. You have chosen to be outside the dominant structure of power, the dominant structure that is in power within our society. You have already made a conscious step outside that. You are a magical human being. Don't tell me that you can't change the world, because you already did. You already did. And you can continue to do so, and we can do so together. And I think that it's important that we do. Thank you. Thank you, wherever you are on the journey. Thank you for listening. I request that you sit with this. If it's something that is hard for you, that you sit and absorb it, and do not just respond right away. Do not be reactionary in that way. I encourage everyone, even if you agree with me, to take some time to sit. Don't necessarily post a comment right away. I really appreciate when people take some time to absorb things before saying something, and I have to do the same thing myself. I want to respond right away, and that's why I type up blog posts really quickly, but then I save them as a draft and I let them sit for a while, because I want to sit with it. I want to sit with the energy. So I encourage you all, wherever you are in the journey, whether you 100% agree with me, 0% agree with me, or 50%, or anywhere on the spectrum, that you just sit with this and you think about it for a while, and you think about how can you improve your relations with other people? How can you make the people in your life feel more comfortable? What would make you feel more comfortable? And if feeling like you have the right to other people's bodily autonomy and personal space, if that feels like something that's important to you that you need, think about why. Ask yourself why. What made you come to that conclusion? And what do you feel that you would be losing by giving people's bodily autonomy and respect of their bodies back to them and putting that back in their hands and returning their power to where it belongs, which is with them? Thank you. Thank you. I'll be done now. Thank you. Let's take a breath together. Breathe in. And release. Honoring this community and all that it does, and all the good that it does, and all the good that it will continue to do. And I'll see you next week. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to be awesome. Blessed be. And goodbye.